everybody, I'm Max.
I'm Andy.
Welcome to Breakdown,
The podcast series that breaks down all the latest crime and punishment news, but it does so with a twist.
So you might have noticed recently there's been quite a lot of stuff about prisons and conditions and all that sort of stuff floating around in the media and in wider discourse. Now that's due to that big story about Daniel Khalifa, the prisoner who escaped from Wandsworth. So today we're going to break down Mark Fairhurst, who's the Prison Officers Association boss, and he gave an interview to Sky News. So we're going to have a look at that.
And then after that, we're going to take a look at an article in the Mirror that looks at the employment of ex-prisoners into the prison system.
It's all very well and good getting to the root cause of what's gone wrong, but we need investment in our prisons. The reason this has happened is because we don't pay prison officers enough. We expect them to work to the ripe old age of 68 because our pension age has been increased, and they're working in the most hostile and violent workplace of anywhere in the world, with crumbling infrastructure and prisoners living in squalor. It's a whole host of pressures on staff which force them to go sick. They're dealing with more and more traumatic incidents, and we're getting more and more cases of PTSD. We need a royal commission into the entire criminal justice system.
Okay, so that was Mark Fairhurst, the chair of the Prison Officers Association, talking to Sky News about the working conditions of prison officers. Now, when I hear that, I don't know about you, Max, but as somebody that's served in prison, and actually I was in a prison yesterday, I would say the job is it's a difficult job, right? So I was in a young offenders institution yesterday, and I was obviously there as a peer doing a programme, but one of the lads just basically refused to go back behind his door. And they got him behind his door, but it took a lot of kind of conjuring and a lot of kind of motivating them and patience. But I'd say they needed a lot of patience. And then the other kid on the landing is like, I want my haircut, can you sort out that mist to come get? And it took me back to my days when I was in custody. So I think that the job is difficult. He mentioned a little bit about like officers getting PTSD, so that's post-traumatic stress disorder, because it's a hostile and a challenging working environment to work in. But he said the world's most hostile environment. So do you think it is the world's most hostile environment?
I think the world's most hostile environment is possibly...
Some people in Yemen might have something to say about that.
I think it's possibly a stretch.
Yeah.
But I think what he's trying to do there is labour the point, you know what I mean? I think, our prison's hostile environments, yeah, 100%. I think, and, I can speak about it from our perspective, and I'm sure you probably agree, like, living in them conditions where, there's like sort of intensity and hypervigilance, anxiety, all these sorts of things. I know how that can seep into the psyche of me as being a prisoner.
Yeah. So it's got to be true of prison officers.
So it has to be true of prison officers
to some degree.
And I think the point about staff going off on sick.
Well, he said forced to be off sick. See, again, that's a reach. No one's forced to be off sick, surely.
No.
So the conditions can contribute towards somebody going off sick. But we've had a conversation already, about offending. You want to touch upon that?
Well, I just think one of the interesting... I mean, the points that Mark Fairhurst is making about the structural conditions and this and that, they exist, right? What's interesting about him making that argument for the explanation of Daniel Khalifa escaping is that, when it comes to talking about prison staff and explaining some of their behaviour, these structural explanations... sort of chronic issues are given as
it's a causal factor because he said it forces them to go off sick.
Yeah, so they're given as explanatory factors.
Yeah.
Now, the same courtesy isn't often given to prisoners who are in the prison.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So when people are getting sent down or this and that, it's not that they're forced into crime from poverty, from school exclusion, from trauma, from breakdown in relationships, and all these sorts of things. They're not the thing that is highlighted and elevated as the explanatory factors. Prisoners are individualised, pathologized, and given punishment.
Yeah. I mean, so the thing is there as well is that I've seen Mark Fairhurst speak a lot on obviously since this Daniel Khalifa.
Daniel Khalifa.
I'll never remember his name. Since he's escaped, they've done a lot of news appearances. And so they was talking about the kind of dragging for Lucy Letby, etc. He was talking about dragging prisoners that have committed serious crimes to court, for example. And, that's fine. And that's the position that the POA was taking up. But until the POA are talking about the conditions of prison officers, I don't hear them advocating for the fact that prisoners are living in squalor. They're not going out and saying, look, these many prisoners have experienced care, they've experienced school exclusion, they've lived in poverty, they've experienced trauma. They're not advocating for prisoners in the media for these structural factors to explain or to at least, kind of provide some kind of context about the contribution towards offending. So I think it's really interesting to some degree that those structural things are presented as a reason for these prison officers maybe letting Daniel Khalifa get out, or not letting him get out of prison, but for the escape of a prisoner from HMP Wandsworth.
The other point to highlight when talking about staff sickness and these sort of things affecting staff is there's a serious issue with experience with staff in the prison. They call it like staffing crisis. I think last year was the highest ever year recorded for prison staff leaving the service. I think half of those who left had served under 3 years, and a quarter of those had served under 1 year.
Yeah.
So that's creating a real vacuum. So as the experience is depreciating,
the population is growing.
The inexperience is growing, and the turnover is quicker.
Alongside the population expanding.
Alongside the prison population expanding.
So that's like it's a recipe for disaster, really, isn't
100%.
it? So why don't we just take a little bit of a listen to the rest of the interview and see what he's got to say?
And I suppose rehabilitation too, because what we all want is low prison numbers and low crime, essentially.
Yeah, prison staff want to give people in their care a chance to reform their lives. But rehabilitation is just a headline and just a word that the government used to hoodwink the public. This has exposed what's really going on in our prisons, how dangerous our working conditions are, and how much we need to reform the system and invest in the system. And that's why the POA are calling for a Royal Commission, which is a pledge in a Tory party manifesto, which they haven't yet enacted.
So rehabilitation is a word used by the government to hoodwink the public. Now that is some statement. That is some statement. And I think, do you know what? There's a lot of truth in what he's saying.
100%.
I think there's a lot of truth in what he's saying. Rehabilitation is often used as a tool or as a word to legitimise stuff that goes on within the prison or the criminal justice system. It can be the strapline or the thing that's elevated. We're rehabilitating prisoners. That actually hides the reality, the exact same conditions that Mark Fairhurst was talking about earlier on, is sort of whitewashed almost by this rehabilitation. He's bang on the money.
He is right. But I do find it interesting that he's almost by definition creating an homogenous group in prison officers by saying, by definition, prison officers want to, what he said, reform prisoners.
Yeah.
Well, my experience is that prison officers, like teachers, like probation officers, like dustbin men, like bus drivers, they've got different drivers for going into the roles.
Yeah, of course.
So some prison officers, because the prison officer role is multifaceted. So some people will go into the prison officer role because it pays a little bit more than stacking shelves in Asda, and it's driven by finance. Others will want the best for the people in prison for whatever reason. And some see themselves as more like kind of police officers or people that can implement sanctions and hold people account for criminal behaviour. So they are a diverse, and rightly so, a diverse group of people. But I find it interesting that he said that, because I agree with him, same as you, that politicians use rehabilitation to sanitise the harsh conditions that he spoke about in terms of prison. However, he then uses reform as a slightly different word, because he's devalued the word rehabilitation for his own members. And so that is somewhere what he's doing is holding prison officers to a higher esteem to politicians. And I think that's interesting in and of itself, because I think there's a game of semantics that are being played there.
Yeah, I agree, definitely. And I think the fact that, so he's accusing the government of using rehabilitation to push through their agenda.
Yeah.
Now when the agenda suits him,
Yeah.
he's expressing the interest of the POA. If they just had the money, they could get on with rehabilitating people.
And have you found stuff that backs up the fact that he wants to?
Yeah. So I've been doing a bit of detective work.
Oh, you've done detective work, have you? You've gone from prisoner to detective. Is that what it is?
No, but so this was about the COVID conditions. When they were on a lot of bang up,
Lock up, yeah,
coming out in little bubbles and things like that. Just thinking about the term about getting, doing work rehabilitation, stuff like that. And on an interview that was on the Prison Officers Association website, it says this.
Mark Fairhurst.
Yeah. What's the point of unlocking a whole wing just for time out the cell, when all they do when they're out the cell is play pool, table tennis, or smoke drugs, or act violently towards staff or other prisoners? That doesn't help rehabilitation. The only reason it happened is because governors are scared of getting a negative report out of the Chief Inspector of Prisons, who consistently complains about too many prisoners being banged up.
I mean, that doesn't sound really rehabilitative, does it?
So it's when it suits.
It's when it suits.
No,
because I'm just thinking, like, it's not like I don't understand where he's coming from to a degree, because we've talked about it being hostile, but you have to, in prisons, develop a sense of community, and so people have to be let out of their cells to develop the skills, to build any social skills, to kind of work out how to be with other people. If they're locked behind their doors and they're not getting purposeful activity, it's less likely to be rehabilitative.
And here's the elephant in the room, right? So Mark Fairhurst is the president of the Prison Officers Association. His job, fundamentally, to fight for the conditions and the rights of prison officers. Now, what we're sort of talking about is prisoners in this mix, yeah?
Yeah.
And I think in the same way that he talks about the government using rehabilitation to hoodwink the public, in the same way that we're saying that the Prison Officers Association are using the same sort of term to push their agenda.
Yeah.
This is what happens when voices or representation from prisoners or ex-prisoners is missing in the conversation. The term around rehabilitation or whatever can be used like a football, kicked around, and prisoners have no agency.
Yeah, so that takes us nice into the segue of what we're going to cover now, which is the Mirror article. So the headline for the article in the Mirror is ex-convicts hired to work inside jails for 25 grand a year, wages sparks corruption fears. So the basis of the article is that senior management believe ex-inmates can offer a unique insight and cut reoffending rates, but the recruitment drive was blasted as a recipe for disaster by an ex-prison officer, while the Prison Officer Association said frontline roles for ex-lags would be akin, get this, to lunatics taking over the asylum. So just given the fact that we've just been through the segue of looking at what Mark Fairhurst said, and the fact that he felt that prison officers want to reform prisoners, how do you perceive that when you hear that the Prison Officers Association are saying that employing people like us to go into prisons is akin to lunatics taking over the asylum?
Well, it's not very rehabilitative, is it?
Well, I mean, for me, I think, like, I was in prisons yesterday. So I was in a prison yesterday as someone that's done 4 prison sentences. I always think, if you believe in rehabilitation, then surely the premise should be that people that have come through the other end and gone through the process of stopping offending and improving their lives and having the circumstances that, like, I've got now. I mean, I work in a university, for example, and go to work in prisons voluntarily. I'm not getting paid. I know. But you know, I'm doing that. So is the idea that nobody becomes reformed, nobody gets to the other end of the rehabilitation process where they can come back and contribute? I mean, what do you think prisoners or ex-prisoners can offer the prison service, for example?
Well, I think it's funny that it's took that turn in the article, because at the start it says that, I think it was outlined by HMPPS, that they were going to have ex-prisoners in rehabilitative roles. Now, I mean, you know, there's loads of talk about lived experience and all that sort of stuff. But as you know, people who've been through the justice system, who come from the same sort of communities that the prisoners have come from, or sort of experience some of them things that sit outside of the prison. And most importantly, I've made that transition into sort of long-term assistance or rehabilitation, I think it almost goes without saying that they would be able to offer something to people trying to make that process.
I think it reminds me of Shad Maroon, who tells a story quite a lot. Shad Maroon is a quite well-known criminologist, and he talks about if you want to get out of a minefield, the best thing to do is follow the person in front of you, because that person will know how to get out of the minefield. I think that's a really good analogy, because me working in youth justice, and the reason I went into that prison yesterday, into a young offenders institution, as someone who's been in that situation, is just to provide hope. And there is some legitimacy that the youth give me when I walk into that situation. We know that the young offenders institutions are in a bit of a bad state. So, I mean, I've just wrote a paper actually that looks at it's being presented at the moment that the youth estate is in a really bad circumstance right now as we speak, and that is true. But if you look at the HMIP reports, that's Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Probation, prisons, and they regulate prisons. You can go back to when I was in a young offenders institution in 1999. The young offenders institutions, as far as regulation goes, have always been failing. They've always been poor, and they've never met the children's needs. So I think that in its current state, why wouldn't you access people who've gone through that process to come and help out?
Yeah, cool. It's like that phrase, isn't it? If it's not broke, don't fix it. Well, if it is broke, try something new to fix it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think what that's saying about the lunatics taking over the asylum, to me that shows
it's derogatory.
It's derogatory, yeah. But to me that shows just how much belief people have even in the process of rehabilitation. It's like, oh, you can be really rehabilitated, but over there somewhere.
Yeah.
You can be rehabilitated if you do a paint and decorating course. You can be do you know what I mean? But whoa. Like, not in my backyard. Coming into the prisons, that's too much.
Yeah.
That's the lunatics taking over the asylum.
Yeah. And it absolutely contradicts the previous statements by Mark Fairhurst that prison officers want to help reform prisoners, because under the fundamental belief then, if that's the case. And look, let's bear in mind, some people are just not appropriate to work in prisons, which does lead us on actually to the next part of the article that looks at corruption. So it was actually stating that there's already lots of corruption in the prison system. So what the article says is we already have a severe problem with corruption. Putting an ex-convict, so just one, this is just putting an ex-convict in there is a recipe for disaster. You know too much. And then another ex-prisoner from HMP The Mount, Hertz, said it's a ridiculous idea, and it would make it very unsafe. Corruption is already bad enough. So, I mean, what's your thoughts on that? Because corruption's already a big problem in HMPPS.
Yeah, I think it's funny that the argument that they're using, to say that ex-offenders or ex-criminals would bring criminality into the prison. The argument they're making to highlight that is the criminality they've already got going on in the prison by serving officers.
It's a bit weird. So when I've worked in like youth justice services, or when so obviously I've been around the criminal justice system for a while now, for nearly 20 years. Most of the people that I know that have gone through that transition of being prisoners or, prolific offenders or whatever, and then come through that and gone into the criminal justice system as professionals, whether that be in the third sector or in youth justice or anywhere around the criminal justice, they're often the most legit. You know why? Because I knew when I went into the youth offending service that one slip and I was gone. Whereas I observed some of my colleagues who weren't carrying my background, were a little bit more blasé about what they were doing, etc. But I really, really had to toe the line. For at least 5 years, I was so scared that someone were going to just find something out that wasn't known about my history. So I really had to toe the line. So you tend to find those people like myself and yourself tend to kind of err on the side of caution when they're working in that environment.
Yeah, and also let's have it right. Yeah, the way that the article, because obviously they're taking a certain viewpoint. The way that it's written and the narrative it's given is almost as if HMPPS or HMIP are saying, "I tell you what, we'll pick people up at the gate. Yeah, give them an officer's uniform and put me." Do you know what I mean? Like for some. It takes years to go through that process and to the point that you could be getting an interview for something like that, for working in them roles. These are people who have earn their stripes. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think the other bit you've got to consider is people that are often officers that are often involved in corruption do so because they're vulnerable. Do you know what I mean? They're vulnerable because of the circumstances that they're in. Now that could happen to somebody that's got previous convictions. I accept that, but by definition, but it's not having a criminal history is not a prerequisite for getting involved in criminality if you work in the criminal justice system. In my experience, it works quite the opposite.
By the same token, not having a criminal history is not
a prerequisite for not.
Yeah. Otherwise, it wouldn't be happening.
Yeah. So the other thing, I suppose, to consider in all of this is the term ex-lags in the title. So it's like, when do you not become an ex-lag? And I think, granted, it's all the red top newspapers, so I understand that. But then when you read that, it's like we're talking a lot about the discriminations that rightly so, that people that fall under the Equality Act, etc., is bad and it should. But are we not? We seem to be a group that kind of don't get really any protection from anywhere. Do you feel like that sometimes?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think like just that term, like ex-lag. I mean, regardless of all that stuff, like lag. Are you a lag?
I don't think so. I hope not. You know what I mean?
No, but like what I'm saying, but like that too, like, so obviously sometimes you get like offender, ex-offender, or con. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's not as if people in prison or anything like, are using.
They don't bother me, them terms, really, because they're a matter of fact.
Yeah.
A lot of people, they rub people up the wrong way, like you know, ex-offender or like. Ex-offender probably isn't the best one, but like an ex-prisoner, like I've been in custody, so I'm not too concerned. I think sometimes the people that get concerned about that are often the people that prison came as a surprise to, so they feel scarred and stigmatised by it. But I mean, I was in jail by the time I was 17. I did 4 sentences, so by the time that arrived, I kind of understood that was the trajectory that was going on. But these terms like lags and stuff that I see in the media, they just they are stigmatising because it's unnecessary to talk about any group like that.
Yeah, because when you're talking about a lag, it paints a picture. Yeah, it's like it's almost like
a derogatory.
Well, and it's almost like a sort of caricature or cartoon picture.
Yeah.
You know, when you think of a lag or an ex-lag or whatever, you know, you can imagine some sort of like big, like brutish, bald head.
Yeah. I can see where you're going there. Yeah.
Maybe you're an ex-lag, you know what I mean? But what I'm saying, but like joking aside, it not only is stigmatising, it's reductive.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Okay, so today's podcast has broken down 2 main bits of news. So the first one is Mark Fairhurst talking to Sky News about prison conditions, and the second one is the Mirror article that looked at the employment of ex-lags. So just to summarise, so prison officers believe that politicians use the word rehabilitation to hoodwink the public. Prison leads at HMPPS want ex-prisoners to help reform current prisoners whilst they're living in squalor, and prison officers want reformed prisoners, but of course they don't want to work with them. So at least we've clarified all of that today, but it highlights how difficult, I suppose, and how complex the criminal justice system is.
Yeah, and I suppose the important thing as well to highlight at the end of this is that, you know, me and Andy aren't sat here professing to be the sort of fonts of knowledge or, you know, the keepers of the expertise of all these subjects. We're just sort of 2 guys with a bit of different perspectives trying to talk this stuff through. So I think, you know, if you agree with some of the stuff we said, sound. And if you disagree with some of the stuff we said, and that's sound too. Let us know in the comments what you think.
So again, this is a new podcast. So if you like what you hear and you want to hear more, please press the like button. Please subscribe with the podcast. But most importantly, ensure that you hit that notification button for next time we release content.